All right, everybody, welcome here to week two. Kind of focusing on a particular civilization. Last week we got ourselves up to civilizations. Now we're going to kind of go around the globe and look at how these civilizations emerge in different regions, starting with Mesopotamia. Kind of starting there because it's kind of convenient. One it's one of the earliest places where cities started to emerge. But the other nice thing about it is they had a form of writing, cuneiform. So we have a lot of records from them to kind of get an idea of what the mechanics of this early civilization were. And before we do, I went through the city Padlet, and I uploaded it there. You can take a look. Good job. I think we covered most everything that we needed. We have potters, masons, farmers, soldiers. So kind of the basics. Everyone did a good job explaining kind of how they integrated into these cities. We had physicians, scribes, architects, advisors, right? So kind of the more specialized tasks there. A musician, which is great, as we will see with Epic of Gilgamesh. You need entertainers in cities as well. Shepherds, farmers. The thing about shepherds, right, is they have. It's a good example of someone who has a job, taking care of animals, and the animals can then get brought to markets and sold. But it's things like people like shepherds or farmers or fishermen. They also had a lot of innate knowledge of the environment, seasons. Could read things, could kind of and then or shepherds, like kind of the early veterinarians, right? They would have to know this stuff, so you could kind of see how that stuff, how all those work together. Now, and hopefully, with that city, I think it's a pretty vibrant city. We did a good job. We are lacking one main thing in the city, and maybe I missed it, but I don't think we have a ruler. So no one stepped up to take control of this city. So we have a lot of people, but with no ruler. Maybe we should think about that. We have priests, we have religion, but yeah, all these things of cities that are part of it. But good job. I think we covered a lot of bases. And we have physicians, doctors, right? All of that stuff. So, and I think a lot of people did a good job of showing how intertwined all of these are. Merchants and markets within cities, which the goods could be sold at, of pottery and blacksmiths. But then markets between cities, merchants move those things back and forth. All of those elements. So that's good. And then the rest of the lecture sort of explains a little more about what we know about Mesopotamia, the different kingdoms, and different figures there that Babylon and Hammurabi, Ashurbanipal and the Assyrians. Talked about trade networks, the connections. Here's this little item here, which you've probably heard about now. This is it. This is lapis lazuli. This is a stone found primarily in Afghanistan. So to get this stone from Afghanistan to Mesopotamia took trade networks, right? So people had to move this, and then they'd polish it up and make jewelry out of it. So anytime you see this blue stone, trade networks existed, which is a good. And the other thing about Mesopotamia is there's not a lot of natural resources there. There's a lot of food and water, but things like copper and zinc. What is it to make bronze? Right, you needed that. You needed to find those, and you needed to bring them. And then, to make these things, trees, you needed to bring that wood and stuff in. There weren't a lot of trees in Mesopotamia, but the surrounding mountains there were. So all those trade networks that show us the interconnections there, and those trade networks will be important. We'll look at those in the context of other civilizations as well as we go along. Neighboring societies. One of the big traders there were Phoenicians. They kind of they came up with their own notation system, which the lecture talks about is the alphabet. And you can see the tracing of that. That cuneiform served its purpose and was very useful in Mesopotamia. But there's other ways people write. The Egyptians had their own form of writing, hieroglyphs. And the Phoenicians created another sort of simplified system where each symbol has a sound associated with it. Morpheme, a morph. There's a special type linguistic word for each one of these. I think they're morphemes, and then each sound you can combine it together, and that's sort of and then that got developed over time, and that's where the English alphabet came from. You can see I gave a little section there that shows how it develops over time. Another big group of people were the Hebrews, who became they adapted one of these gods, Yahweh, as the God, the monotheistic God, and established this religion of Judaism, which is part of this early world as well. In their capital city of Jerusalem, which is still around today. So kind of where that, and I give a little background of Judaism as well. And the last two things, please do kind of look a little more in depth at, because they are the primary sources, which is what the sort of building blocks of history. We have a lot of archaeology that we know of, finds of jewelry that tell us a lot about these societies. But what they tell us, what people have written about themselves, tell us a lot. And so I gave two examples of primary sources which reveal a lot about the society and culture of Mesopotamia. One, Lacos of Hammurabi. Take a look through those. I also kind of gave a lecture of those, kind of pointed out ones. But one, it tells us that there were a lot of laws. These were very structured worlds. So they needed 282 laws to kind of regulate these cities, to make them just. But if you kind of look at those a little more, it reveals a lot about what these cultures were. There were definitely judges. I mean, that's another task that people were in charge of these. There were trials. You could bring evidence. Talks about class relations. There's different punishments for, slaves and free people. So that tells us those two existed. Slaves have some rights as well. Tells us about gender, women and men, and where they roll in as well, and the sort of relationships between family relationships, inheritance laws, and then at the end there it kind of gives different rules for what different professions should do. And basically the big thing is, if you mess up and don't do your job, you're going to be killed, right? And there's a whole section on farming, like you got to maintain the irrigation. If it's your fault, the irrigation system goes down because of neglect, that's on you, right? You're going to be charged with it. You're going to have to repair it all, right? But if it's an act of God, right, that's out of your control. No worry about it, right? Or if you build a house and you get and it falls down, that's on you, man. You're getting fined some shekels, right? So. And then the big one there that I think people have heard about is an eye for an eye, right? That if you do something, there's going to be a retribution for that. So that's kind of where that comes from as well. And then the Epic of Gilgamesh, another story, kind of gives us a little bit fills in the world of Mesopotamia in a way that we get to see who the story of Gilgamesh. He was a king that then later gets mythologized. He has this buddy Enkidu, who's sort of again in the beginning of Gilgamesh, he's a really bad king. So this story is also all about what you should and shouldn't do as a king. To punish him, they gods create this Enkidu character, this sort of uncivilized half man, half animal, who then they fight, and then they're like best buds, right? And they're like, okay, let's do this, and they go out on all these adventures. And then chapter 3 focuses in a little bit about Gilgamesh and Ishtar. So now we see some gods, the Mesopotamian gods. Ishtar wants to marry Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is like, I don't think so, right? Everybody you've been in relationship with, right? There's a lot of red flags, right? Let's just say that, and I don't really want part of this. And Ishtar, as a goddess, says, too bad, right? And gets really angry, goes to her father, says, we need to punish them. The bull of heaven comes down. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill it, right? And there's this big scene of where they make this big altar. So we get to see kind of like some religion there. And then the gods are like, all right, well, somebody's got to die, right? Humans and gods. And can't be Gilgamesh because it's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. So Enkidu has to die. And then the whole second part of this book talks about, or this chapter talks about the death of Enkidu and Gilgamesh's reflection of that. Very poignant. He has a big poem at the end about his lament, which I think one of the musicians talked about the lament in their post, which is good. And then, and then the rest of the book, interesting. This was found in Ashurbanipal's library, Nineveh. And then when it was first translated, they found this flood story. So it's kind of interesting. Like they're like, oh, here's the Bible, but then it's this whole other story, which shows the intertwining of stories and myths in these worlds. And then in the end, he tries to get immortality, and he fails. It's why humans aren't immortal. So it's kind of a little bit about Mesopotamia. Hopefully, definitely go work through the lectures. And then the discussion post for this week, there's 3 questions. Choose one of those. Please don't choose all of them. I think that's it. Have a good rest of your week.